can we see, folks, how the later versions of the same tradition grew in increments from earlier ones? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. If we can, then the earlier forms have more claims of being authentically stage one, don't they? Okay. I want you to see this criterion at work as used by context group scholar Richard Rohrbach, criterion of the developing tradition. We're going to break down a passage. And this is going to be fascinating. I'm going to show you. This just reflects, by the way, a very condensed version of a hell of a lot of scholarly research, energy, and time. Okay? And peer review. Phase one. Jesus said, here's the Jesus saying, the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. Scholars are pretty sure that stage one Jesus was really good at zingers and one-liners. He spoke in a pithy way. Ding, 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 there's an alarm going off when you read John and you start speaking in long-winded monologues. Jesus said the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. That's a one-liner. And Jesus was good at one-liners, wasn't he? The historical Jesus had an ability to somehow capture some truth and give it to you in a very succinct way. That was his religious genius. Rohrbach began his analysis of this saying by assuming that this one-liner came from the historical Jesus. Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. Hey, wait a minute. Isn't the saying really, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath? Yeah. But the Greek word there is not the word man or male, andres. It's not that word. Rather, the Greek word is the gender-neutral anthropos, where we get the word anthropology from. Okay? So, why in our New American Bible, for example, by the way, I'm not for gender-inclusive language, and that's a big problem in modern translations. Okay? Right? One of the context group scholars used to go to a Polish mass, right? And there he's got the missal. And on one, just like in our English Spanish down here in South Florida. And on one side you have Paul, and he's talking brothers and sisters, and on the other side he says bracia, brothers. Okay? Guess what? Paul and our ancestors in the faith are rolling around going, that we didn't think like that. We didn't, you love the gender inclusive language and make sure American hearts feel good, but we don't believe that, we don't think that, we don't perceive that. Why are you distorting us?
I used to hear brothers only.
Yeah, it's actually brothers. It actually should be brothers. That's actually the text. We should not have gender inclusive language. We should represent respectfully how our ancestors in the faith thought. By the way, feminism, great. Including men and women in the church, absolutely important and necessary. But let's not distort our ancestors in the faith. Let's see God's messy love where it is. Okay? All right. Jesus said, but here in this case, it should be human, not man. Jesus said the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. So let's theorize at least that this one-liner may have actually originated stage one. Phase two, look at the color. Early pronouncement story gets put onto this saying. Originally, this saying is just floating there in a collection of sayings, all right? What was the context? There is no context, other than Jesus said. That's your context. So let's situate it into a narrative, or let's situate it into a scenario. So we'll give it an early pronouncement story. Here's the setting. He was passing through a field of grain on the Sabbath. Action. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Let's throw in the one-liner. Then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. I want you to see the red and the blue all come after. This one-liner has been turned into what is known as a pronouncement story. And what scholars mean by that is that it has been formatted. We know from the Greco-Roman schoolboy manuals called Progymnasmata that when the elite boys, like Luke, or even the other scribes in the New Testament, were being taught to write, they were instructed to embed the sayings of wise and famous people into anecdotes. We have many instruction manuals that explain how to do that. This is what happened here. It got formatted. The anecdote must start off with a setting, indicate the action, and then drop in the one-liner so it has context. The only context we had in the collection of sayings was Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. Now it has been recontextualized, has it not, in being formatted. He was going through the grain fields now. Pharisees tell him, why are your disciples doing what is not lawful? Then Jesus one-liner. Scholars know that this formatted form could not come from the time of Jesus. As a matter of fact, in the time of Jesus, were his primary adversaries the Pharisees? But I tell you what, by the time Matthew is writing in his community, the Matthean Jesus group's primary adversaries are Ben Zacchaeus Pharisees. Suddenly, Jesus' enemies that Jesus is railing against are the Pharisees. Who did Jesus actually primarily rail against? The Sadducees. But by the time of Matthew's being written, the Sadducees are extinct. They were wiped out when the temple was destroyed. So no need to talk about them anymore. That much, right? Now the new problem with the living Jesus is the Pharisees. What if I told you Jesus was probably a Pharisee? A Pharisee. Now, when I say Pharisee to most people, immediately Catholics in the room go, oh, a rabbi. Nope. We don't even know what the Pharisees were really that much. We have all of these groups we have scant information on. We like to anachronize them into our stereotypes of medieval Jews, doing discredit to our Jewish brothers and sisters and to our ancestors in the faith, common ancestors. So the whole formatting here was not part of the Aramaic Hebraic system of training scribes. The idea that you set in a context, a setting, and then a statement by adversaries, that isn't how Hebraic, Aramaic writing scribes were trained, but it is how Greek writing scribes were trained to write as boys. It's Hellenic, Greco-Roman. Yes?
You would think, though, that even if he said that sentence, he said it in some context.
Exactly. And that Jesus confronted people, that happened too. And that Jesus had religious disputes, absolutely. So it's honest, but the formatting is Greco-Roman and foreign to that part of the world. The formatting comes from somebody, an Israelite writer who is living in a different social setting somewhere else in the Mediterranean world.
Why didn't the first person who wrote that down put in the context?
You know why? That's a fascinating question. Why do you think?
Because they were illiterate?
No, they were literate. They wrote it down. They wrote it down in Aramaic.
Because it was so common, it was nothing.
They wanted to preserve the words of the master. And by the way, theocracy's coming any minute now. And we don't have a problem to occasion putting it in a context which is going to give a relevant message dealing with the crisis that we're dealing with right now. Like, for example, why are the ones who are messianists being told by other Israelites, you're no longer Israelites? You're anathematized. And who's doing that? The Pharisees. Yes.
So when he was walking through the fields, that did really happen? That was made up?
That's a later augmentation.
So no one said anything?
Maybe Jesus historically would do things where he would kind of go, stretch the dietary practices. That's being remembered, but this actual occurrence is, that's
Possibly did not.
that's an augmentation. What's guaranteed stage 1 is the saying.
Like basically made up a story around sage,
Yeah.
more or less.
We're just dealing with one saying here, by the way.
Well, if there's one saying, there must be.
Let's keep on, Deborah. Let's keep on. Hence, we know that the saying or one-liner has already migrated from the world of Syro-Palestine into the Greco-Roman world and is being used by people there who have kids that learn to write with this model from the Progymnasmata, the schoolboy manuals. We know those schoolboy manuals. So when you see writing that comes from, we know the guy. It's a tell. It's a tell. It's the same tell the teachers know when you cut and paste off Wikipedia. You cut and paste off. It's the same thing, ladies and gentlemen. It's like when you read Matthew, the infancy narratives, and Luke's infancy narrative, and Luke chapter 1 and 2, you know both these guys were trained, Luke way better, by Progymnasmata. You know it.
Just to make things.
It's not about a doubting. It would be uncanny if they wrote like that without being trained by the manual. Like uncanny X-Men. Okay? All right. So when they are telling the Jesus story, they embed the saying into a little anecdote to help give you a little context. Well, not you, but the original audience, right? Okay. And it gets better. This is the criterion of the developing tradition. All right? Here's phase 3. It gets better. Setting. He was passing through a field of grain on the Sabbath, and as they made their way, his disciples. Wait a minute, stage 1, were they disciples?
Right. No.
His disciples began to pluck ears of grain. By the way, are these Peter, James, John, and these others? Or are they the community that's writing this? Who are the disciples? Us. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Here comes stage 1. Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath." In phase 3, Jesus' followers included themselves into the narrative. One Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, that's phase 2, and as they, phase 3, made their way, his disciples began to pluck ears of grain. Note the singular he and the plural they. This is a dead giveaway, a tip-off telling scholars that this narrative has to be a later addition. Dead giveaway. Dead giveaway. We ate ribs with this dude. Okay, what is going on here is something familiar to preachers even today. They tell a story, and in order to make it feel real and contemporize it, see, they sort of insert themselves into it. Or they'll sort of insert the audience into the story to make them feel included. Because after all, that's why they're writing it down, folks, right? They're writing it to impact the audience. That's right. Eat ribs with this. Didn't have a clue. Phase 4. We're having too much fun. He was passing through the field of grain on the Sabbath. And as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck ears of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Uh-oh. And then he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest. I'm sorry, I mean Zadok. I made a mistake. And ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat. And he also gave it to those who were with him. Then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. In phase 4, an Old Testament quotation gets added to help interpret the event. This is something preachers do today, and something ancient preachers did as well. Find an Old Testament story or anecdote or quotation and use it to help them understand the Jesus story.
But it's not.
Don't we do that in church with an Old Testament reading?
There is a priest who says, if you have a question in the Old Testament, go to the new one and find the answer.
Here we go. We have a priest who says, if you have a problem, a question in the Old Testament, go to the New Testament and find the answer. And we have a word for that. It's called supersessionism. What does that mean? That means that the Old Testament texts have no value and no understanding unless we have the New Testament. Only then do they have value. Only then do they have meaning. Gee, is that how our Jewish brothers and sisters think about those texts? And how about our Muslim brothers and sisters? Is that how they think about them? Is that way? I'm sorry, Scott Hahn. No, you're wrong. Big problem. S is for supersessionism. So then this becomes part of the sermon. This is what has happened here. A little story about David gets inserted, telling about how David took the bread of the presence to feed his men when some priest, we don't remember who exactly, just put in Abiathar, one of those guys, was the high priest. If David could do this, then it's fine for Jesus, right? That makes sense. Isn't he the son of David? Okay, that works. Phase 5, it gets better still. He was going through a field of grain on the Sabbath. And as they made their way, phase 3, his disciples began to pluck ears of grain. Phase 2, and the Pharisees said to him, look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Phase 4, and he said to them, have you never read what David did? When he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God when Zadok was high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and he also gave it to those who were with him? Phase 1, then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. Phase 5, so the Son of Human is Lord even of the Sabbath. You're looking at the evolution right there in the developing tradition. What was stage 1? Probably. Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. And it went cooking, didn't it? That's all right. By the way, isn't it all true? Amen. It's all true. And some of it actually happened. Moving right along. Finally, in phase 5, somebody likes to add a conclusion, a little punchline point. That's not a bad sermon. I like that sermon. Turns out Jesus is the son of the human, which of course is the celestial sky vault man. I like that. That's pretty cool. Pretty good. Okay. It's not a bad sermon. It started off with a Jesus saying, a simple one-liner. The Sabbath was made for the human, not the human for the Sabbath. The end result is Mark chapter 2, verses 23 to 28. Okay. What you should be seeing in that little text is how what is in our Gospels grew incrementally as people used the Jesus sayings and put them into newer and newer contexts and added Old Testament quotations and drew conclusions. Hence, what you should be beginning to see is that our Gospels are not 21st century Western histories of Jesus, but rather are the theological preaching of the earliest Jesus groups about Jesus. And this is what causes so many difficulties for scholars trying to figure out the history of Jesus. At this point, let me just add this. Sometimes when people get exposed to these kinds of things, right, they get shaken, not stirred. And sometimes people even come to me and say, Bill, you're destroying people's faith. And I'm so flattered when people say that. Because they think of me God. I have to tell them I'm not God. I can neither create faith nor destroy faith. And even God without your yes can't do that. Or no. But we're not talking about faith here. We're talking about beliefs. These I do have the power to challenge. And so do you. And that's one of our jobs as mature Christians. We need to challenge immature, childish beliefs. We believe in a living tradition as Christians. We believe in a living tradition that develops. And the Holy Spirit, we believe, guides in this messiness, not coerces. So, take hope.
Basically, Bill, what they were doing, they were just embellishing on the story. As time went on, they embellish and make it get better.
That's the criterion of the developing tradition. But now let's give them a little more credit. Are they just embellishing because, oh, let's embellish it and Jesus grew wings and flew off? No, that's the idea. That's not the idea. The idea is they developed to demonstrate a problem, to put Jesus into and put us into the situation with Jesus in a problem that we're going through now. We have Pharisees saying that we are unrighteous. Who's we?
Jesus.
A community, maybe in Rome, in the Markan situation. We have other Israelites living here that are saying our group is inauthentic. So we have to have this story. Yes, somebody had their hand up back there. Begonia.
I think that they're making it relatable.
They're making it relatable. Don't you have to do that for a story? If you just have a Jesus saying, how relatable is that? Yeah, what did he really mean by that? See how it keeps giving off meaning? We call the Bible the classic of classics.
And they're always trying to give Jesus honor.
Folks, what makes a classic is that it is reactive to new minds and new generations. As new audiences hear it, it keeps giving off meaning. When we say the Bible is inspired, we don't mean that it's dictated. We mean that it is the classic of classics. We mean that it keeps giving off new meaning. But shouldn't we ask, what was the first meaning? What was the original meaning? What was the original context, the literal sense? Shouldn't we? Or, no, to hell with it, I just use my meaning right now, which is God hates gay people. Or, you know what? The end is about to come. My situation right now. I'm so special. Everybody else, the Bible has no meaning for. Only for me today. Or, God hates Palestinians. Go Israel. Or, God hates the Jews. By the way, all those people read that in the Bible, don't they? Yes.
Okay.
And then
Do you think that priests that are studying to be priests, seminarians, are being taught this?
oh, sure, those that information is there.
And so
I'm so thankful that we don't have a desperate need to fill chairs and have property managers, that we graduate people, and I'm so glad we don't have an inundation through Catholic media to create stormtroopers for neo-orthodoxy and fundamentalism, Catholic fundamentalism. I'm so glad that doesn't happen. We have actually a very balanced, healthy appropriation of the Second Vatican Council and its documents, Marie. We don't have to worry about that. So I never have encountered any fundamentalist priests, have you? And I've never encountered any fundamentalist people, huh? With tendencies towards homophobia, with tendencies toward absolute control and domination of everything and micromanagement. Have you ever had that experience? Huh?
I couldn't hear the question, Bill.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
The question was now.
Right? That we have to fill chairs because we don't have a vocations crisis either, right? And you know, sometimes we refuse to get in with even the 20th century, much less the 21st. Huh? Yeah, exactly. But it's okay. Like, let's have a committee. Let's have a committee where we bring in women to the committee. And of course we have, 98 men and we'll bring in 2 women. That's pretty healthy. I like that's diversity. That's what I think. What do you think? Dave, what were you going to add to this wonderful dance?
The danger of using scripture as proof text for your argument.
Yeah.
And the danger.
Yeah, this completely destroys that. If you've been exposed to this, wave goodbye to Scott Hahn and what you're learning from him.
A proof text without context is a pretext.
Right.
Proof text?
Say that again loud and proud, brother. I know it's hard for you to be loud, Robert. All right, come on.
A proof text without context is a pretext.
That's it. Beautiful.
That's one line right there.
You got it. Like our Lord. And by the way,
Embellish that.
yeah.
That's first stage.
You got it. Good deal. Hey, thanks for watching. Just continue the playlist for the next part of the study. If you have further questions, this is good. They will get addressed, so keep watching. If you found value, please subscribe, like, and share. As always, questions, comments, and criticisms are most welcome. God bless you.